Hey, everybody. We're back again. This is Chapter 1, Lesson 2, Types of Government we're going to talk about today. And so here we go. Jump right into this thing. Hey, there is your SWABOT. You are going to define the essential political terms, concepts such as nation, state, government, and sovereignty, which we've already done. You explain the difference amongst unitary, confederate, and federal systems of government, and differentiate between monarchy and democracy. All right, so there's our essential question. Okay, government systems. Okay, all governments reflect the history and the culture of the society that creates them. All societies organize governments in one way or another to carry out specific functions. So, depending on what their history has been like, depending on what their culture is like, their language, their religion, will all depend on how they decide to form a government or what type of government they decide to form. But all governments basically are organized around essential functions. Okay. And so those two essential functions are basically how democratic are they? That means how involved in the process of decision making and governing are they? Okay. Are the people? Okay. How involved are the people? And then, second, how is power divided between the larger society and smaller divisions? So, like cities, states, counties, etc. Okay. We're going to look at three main systems of government: unitary, confederate, and federal. Okay. Each have their pros and cons. We're going to talk about those. So, first off, a unitary system gives all key powers to a central government. That central government is pretty much the only government. Sometimes they divide up into smaller divisions, mostly cities and towns. But those cities and towns only get their power from the central government. Okay, so the central government decides what those other divisions of government have power over. Um, the advantage of the unitary system is that all of the political power, all the government power is centralized into one location, one physical location, as well as one body. Okay. Um, and then the localities have less power, but that can also be a disadvantage. Localities might not be able to make the laws that they need to for their unique situations, location, or people. Okay. So, modern day examples of unitary systems: Japan, Bolivia, and England. Okay. A confederate system is basically kind of a loose union of independent and sovereign states. The United States was a confederacy right after the Revolutionary War up until 1789 when the Constitution was ratified. And basically, you have all of the individual states are actually more powerful individually than the central government. So you have a central government that is, in essence, very weak, has very little power and authority. The states hold the majority of the power and authority, and they give to the central government whatever powers they want it to have. Now, the advantages of that is that individual states can create their unique laws that they need, that they want. They can enforce those laws however they want to, and the central government has little to no control over them. Disadvantages are that, well, the central government is weak. National defense can be questionable because the central government depends on its army coming from the states. The states have to give up their military to, or parts of their military to the central government in order to create a national military force. There's also more money problems in Confederate systems because, again, the central government has no way of collecting money, but they usually make the mistake of giving it the power to pay off bills. Well, it can't pay off bills if it can't collect taxes. So, yeah, that's a problem. Um, Modern examples: the European Union, that's the majority of the nations, okay, the states, countries in Europe are all combined together in a confederacy. And then in the South Pacific, the Federated States of Micronesia, a few hundred islands, actually, there's quite a few islands that are all joined together. The inhabited islands have their own government systems. and the actual central government of Micronesia is extremely weak and really doesn't do a whole lot other than trade, and that's about it. Okay, the federal system. Federal system also has a central government, but then that central government also allows smaller governments, state, county, city governments to exist as well. So power is divided and divided somewhat equally. Each level of government also in a federal system has its own sovereignty. Okay, so the central government can make decisions without anybody telling it what to do, but then so can the smaller governments to a point. They are what we call semi-sovereign. Okay, so for example, here in the US, our states are semi-sovereign. They're allowed to make laws. Any laws that are not the responsibility of the federal government are the responsibility of the individual states, which is quite a bit actually. And you'll see that more when we talk about the Constitution coming up here another week or so. So the individual states then also allow, or they are allowed to make their own laws, enforce those laws however they want to, as long as it doesn't violate or get in the way of laws that the federal government has created. So it's one of the reasons why the whole legalization of marijuana in states like California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and other states, quite a few now that have gone that way. It's a little bit questionable on whether those states could actually do it. And if the federal government really, really wanted to, they could demand that the states stop that legalization, okay? Because that actually falls under the authority of the federal government. So federally, marijuana is still illegal, um, but statewide, it's legal if you're within certain ages and stuff like that. So we have that interesting situation that we're in. Then we have constitutional governments. Okay, a constitution is basically just a written document, a written plan that provides rules and structures for the government. The main reason why constitutions are written is so that you have something actually written out that sets out the ideals and the beliefs of the people of that country. It creates a basic structure of government and defines the powers and authorities, responsibilities and duties of that government. And it provides the supreme law of the land. Okay, so basically, it provides all of the rules and structure for how the game of government, politics, and ruling a group of people is going to be played. The U.S. government, it's our Constitution is the oldest written Constitution. It was written in 1787 and it was ratified, or in other words, approved in 1789. Quite a few other countries around the world, in fact, most of them have written constitutions. So countries like France, Kenya, India, Italy, Japan, all have written constitutions. Great Britain is a constitutional monarchy, so they have a constitution, but it's unwritten. It's basically based off of years of legal documents, court decisions, customs, traditions, those kinds of things. So they're a bit unique, and they're one of the few, in fact, pretty much the only government that has an unwritten constitution. So obviously, a constitutional government has a constitution as its source of power and authority. It's called that. Um, the other purpose for constitutions is to limit the size and the power of the government that it establishes. That means automatically, when you hear a description of a country, a nation, as being a constitutional government, you know automatically that that government is limited in what it can do. Okay, that's what the Constitution does. Uh, Constitutions, though, are usually written a little bit vague. That means there's not a lot of really deep details as to how, what, when, where, why. Um, because when, especially back when they were written in 1787, for example, they didn't know about a lot of stuff that was going to be happening in the future. They wanted that to be an enduring document that would last for hundreds of years. And so they left it a little bit vague so that they could change it as needed. So the Constitution doesn't always say how the government is going to work. That's what we call politics. That's left up to the people who end up being in the government and running the government. They say how it's going to work, and we call that politics. So you've heard the word politics, political a lot. That refers to how government is run by the people. Okay? So there are three major types of government. There's authoritarian, monarchy, and democracy. So an authoritarian government is a type of government in which that government controls all aspects of its citizens' lives. So their social life, their private life, their economic life, their political life. They're told exactly, pretty much, um, where to live, who to live with, what they're going to do for work, what they're going to learn at school, um, who they're going to hang out with, what political party they're going to be part of, what their beliefs are going to be, and all kinds of things like that. So there are different types of authoritarianism. There's totalitarianism, dictatorship, oligarchy, and monarchy. These can all be authoritarian. In fact, the first three usually are authoritarian. And so there's a lot of exchange between all three of those. Okay, so not a huge bit of difference between them. So totalitarianism is a form of government in which the leadership, the government itself, controls, like I said, all aspects of its citizens' lives. Okay, even down to what kind of art and music that they can listen to, religion that they can have. I mean, everything about their life is usually controlled by the government. Power is usually concentrated into hands of only one or a handful of people. No opposition is allowed in those governments. So anyone who opposes the government, speaks out, tries to protest, anything like that, becomes the target of police uh, and militarized organizations to go and put that person down, either arrest them and put them into prison for the rest of their life, um, or they literally disappear in some cases. Personal freedoms, usually not really allowed. Freedoms like freedom of speech and assembly, even though the government might say that those exist, they in practice do not. And in totalitarianism, the government controls the media. So all information that you get, anything you do with your life is all controlled by the government. Okay? These kinds of governments can sometimes appear democratic. They'll hold elections. But when you have an election with only one person on the ballot, is that really an election? Or even if there is more than one name on the ballot, that opponent suddenly disappears right before the election or gets sick and dies, or gets sick or dies. Then that's not an election. That's a sham. That's fake, um, and not democratic at all. So examples of totalitarianism, don't really have a whole lot of those today other than North Korea and People's Republic of China. So China is seen as being somewhat totalitarianism. They're a little bit more like an oligarchy, which we'll talk about in a minute. But of course, Hitler's Nazi Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, and Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy. Okay, those are all examples of totalitarianism. Dictatorship usually is a form of totalitarianism uh, that where you have one ruler. So like Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, there's only one person that has total power. Okay, so dictatorship can be a form of totalitarianism. It is a form of authoritarian government where there's just one person. An oligarchy is a bit different. And this is where we have the examples of Vietnam right now, Russia, China, where you have a political party or a small group of people that hold all of the political power within the government, and they are authoritarian. Oligarchy is, we break that up into olig and archy. Archy meaning rule, olig means few, so rule of the few. Oligarchs usually at least historically, have gotten their power because they were either a military leader, like a general or an admiral or something like that. they were somehow famous, so they were known by everyone for whatever reason, and or their wealth. They were very wealthy and were able to pay to get their name out there and get known. Or it could be any combination of those three that would allow oligarchs to get their power. So it could also be, you know, could be industrial. So they could be business leaders that will become the rulers of the country, military leaders. Most commonly, it's military or a political party. Also, the wealthy. Textbook talks about that some people could argue that the United States right now is an oligarchy because the majority of our political leaders, even though they are elected, they're extremely wealthy. They're all independently wealthy, the majority of them. And they only hire their friends who are also independently wealthy. So some people kind of argue that the US could be considered an oligarchy right now through that definition. But it's not really authoritarian, and we do have elections. It's just our choices of who to vote for might be a little bit narrowed down, you know, to only very wealthy people. Monarchy, we all know about what a monarchy is. Basically, king, queen, emperor holds all the government power. They've been around for forever, basically since the beginning of human history. Monarchy, mono meaning one, again, archy meaning rule, so one person ruling. Not all monarchs are authoritarian, though they can be. Just kind of depends on the tradition or law. Sometimes it depends on the individual. Right now in the world, the country of Swaziland on the continent of Africa is about the only absolute monarchy left in the world today. Their king is authoritarian. He does not share his power with anyone else. He uses militarized and secret police to target his opposition, anyone who speaks out against him. There's no political parties. Basically, he is the absolute ruler there, and not very nice. People don't have any rights or anything like that. Most of the modern democracies today, or sorry, most of the modern monarchies today are constitutional. That means that the king, queen, emperor, whatever they call it, um, does not hold a whole lot of power. They usually share power with some other legislative body, a lawmaking body, and that power is limited by a written or an unwritten constitution in the case of Great Britain. Okay, so we have Great Britain, Sweden, Japan, Netherlands, just as a few that still have kings or queens or emperors, but they're more of like a ceremonial figurehead. They don't really have a whole lot of power like the Queen of England. Um, yeah, she's a queen. She lives off of everybody's taxes, um, but she doesn't have any political power. The most political power she has is when they choose a prime minister. She says yes or no, and that's it. That's all of her political power. That's it. So democratic governments, those are governments that derive their power from the consent of the people. Okay, citizens in democratic states know that they can replace their elected officials through voting. Um, Democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning people, and kratia, meaning rule. So it's literally rule by the people. Um, okay, so that's really where the power comes from. We have two basic types of democratic governments. We have direct and representative. So we have two types of democratic governments, direct and representative. A direct democracy is a government in which all citizens cast votes directly on all government issues and laws. Okay, that type of democracy can only exist really in small societies where it's practical for everyone to meet together and discuss and vote all in one place. So today, really, direct democracies do not exist in the world today except for in a few cities in New England, so kind of the northeast of the United States, and a few places in Switzerland, a few of the counties in Switzerland that are super small and people all live really close together and they can get together pretty easily. So that's a direct democracy. Representative democracy, also known as an indirect democracy, basically the people hold the political power just like in a direct democracy, but they give over that power to an elected official whom they choose. And that person is the one who enforces and interprets the laws, um, and basically does everything political government wise that needs to be done. They know, though, that elected officials can be replaced through the election process, electing others, voting for others to take their place. And it's actually the most common form of democracy in the world today. So the US is what we refer to as a democratic republic. Okay, that means that we elect representatives, and we do not have a monarch. Okay, no king, queen, emperor, right? Um, Democracies succeed best in countries that have an educated population. So that's one of the reasons why we have public school and make you go to school. A strong network of volunteer organizations. Okay, so that's like, Lions Club, Kiwanis, Rotary, those kinds of things. Um, the civic groups that allow people to serve and volunteer. Okay, kind of the same thing. Um, so, churches, temples, labor unions, those are all examples of civic groups and volunteer organizations that allow people to serve, and help in their society. Um, those groups all exist outside the government. Okay, so the government does not control them, regulate them, or anything, to a certain point. They might assist the government, and the government might assist them, such as the Red Cross, assists the government in disaster zones and things like that. And so the government also helps the Red Cross in making sure that they have funding and things like that. Um, so that's one kind of rare example there. All right, everybody. So this is all that we're going to talk about today. We will cover the principles of democracy another time. Have a great day.